There's a powerful truth many people miss when they're dealing with someone who pulls away, someone who feels distant, someone who doesn't love in the loud, obvious, constant way they expected. And that truth is this: not everyone who steps back is stepping away from love. Sometimes they are stepping back because of how deeply they feel it. You see, attention is easy to give. Anyone can text you all day, flatter you, show up when it's convenient, and disappear when it's not. Attention is often driven by ego, by boredom, by the need to feel wanted. But loving someone's soul, that is a very different kind of connection. That is something quieter, deeper, and far more intimidating for someone who isn't used to emotional vulnerability. An avoidant person doesn't fear you because you're not enough. They fear you because you matter too much. And when someone values your soul, not just your attention, their behavior starts to tell a very different story, one that you can only see if you're willing to look beyond surface level actions. They may not always know how to stay consistently present, but notice how they never fully let you go. Notice how, even in their silence, there's a thread that keeps pulling them back to you. That's not confusion. That's connection. Because when someone is only interested in your attention, they replace you easily. They move on quickly. They don't sit with the weight of your absence. But when someone connects with your soul, your absence echoes in their life. It lingers. It teaches them something. It makes them confront parts of themselves they would rather avoid. And here's the deeper layer most people don't talk about. Avoidant individuals often express love through restraint rather than intensity. They don't overwhelm you with constant closeness because closeness overwhelms them. Instead, they show love in the moments they choose to return, in the way they listen when they are present, in the subtle respect they hold for who you are. They might disappear, but they don't disrespect your essence. They might struggle, but they don't forget your value. There's a kind of reverence in how they hold you, even from a distance. And if you pay attention, you'll notice something else. They don't try to turn you into someone else. They don't mold you just to keep you around. Because deep down, they're not attached to the validation you give them. They're attached to the truth of who you are. That's the difference. Someone who wants attention will shape you into what suits them. Someone who values your soul will quietly admire you, even if they don't fully know how to stand beside you yet. Now, this doesn't mean you should accept inconsistency or settle for less than you deserve. That's not the lesson here. The lesson is understanding what's real, so you don't misinterpret it. Because when you understand that their distance is not always a lack of feeling, you stop chasing in a way that drains you. You stop trying to prove your worth, and instead you stand in it. You begin to say, I see what this connection is, but I also see what I need. And that's where your power lives, not in forcing someone to love you the way you want, but in recognizing when love exists and choosing whether it aligns with the life you're building. Because real love, soul-level love, is not about losing yourself to keep someone close. It's about staying rooted in who you are while allowing others to rise to meet you. And if they can't, then your soul will still be intact. Your worth will still be untouched. And the right person, the one who doesn't just feel deeply, but shows up consistently, will recognize you not as something to retreat from, but as something to cherish fully. So don't confuse silence with indifference. Don't confuse distance with absence of love. But also, don't abandon yourself waiting for someone to overcome their fears. Because the greatest proof of love isn't just that someone feels something for your soul, it's that they choose you clearly, courageously, and consistently. There is a profound difference between someone who craves your attention and someone who truly values your essence. And understanding that difference can change the way you interpret every interaction in your life. Attention is often loud, immediate, and easy to recognize. It shows up in frequent messages, constant compliments, and an eagerness to be around you whenever it suits the other person. At first glance, it can feel like love because it feeds your emotional needs in the moment. But attention, on its own, is often driven by temporary desire, by ego, loneliness, or the need for validation. It seeks a response, a reaction, something that reassures the other person that they matter. When someone is attached to your attention, their behavior tends to fluctuate depending on what they are receiving. If you respond quickly, they lean in. If you pull back, they may chase harder, but not necessarily because they value you deeply. It's because they value the feeling they get from you. You become a source of emotional fuel rather than a person they are deeply invested in understanding. And this is why attention-based connections often feel intense but unstable. They are built on external stimulation, not internal appreciation. In contrast, when someone values your essence, their connection to you goes far, beyond surface-level engagement. They are not just drawn to how you make them feel in the moment. They are drawn to who you are at your core, your thoughts, your values, your energy, your way of seeing the world. This kind of appreciation is quieter, but it runs deeper. It doesn't always show up in constant communication or grand gestures. Instead, it reveals itself in the way they observe you, respect you, and hold space for your individuality. Someone who values your essence doesn't need to constantly pull you into their orbit to feel secure. They don't treat you like something to consume. Instead, they treat you like something to understand. They listen more carefully. They remember small details about you. They respect your boundaries even when it means less access to you. Their interest isn't driven by urgency, it's driven by meaning. This is where things can become confusing, especially when dealing with someone who is emotionally avoidant, because their way of expressing connection doesn't always match the traditional signs of affection people expect. They may not flood you with attention, and they may not always be consistently present. But when they do show up, there is a depth in their presence that feels different. It's not performative, it's not about impressing you or securing your validation. It's about genuinely connecting with you in the moment they allow themselves to be open. And that's the key distinction. Attention seeks to be seen, while essence seeks to see. One is about being noticed, the other is about noticing you. When someone values your attention, they are focused on how you respond to them. When they value your essence, they are focused on who you are, even when you are not actively giving them anything. They don't just engage with you when it's convenient or beneficial. They carry an awareness of you even in your absence. You are not easy, irreplaced, because what they see in you is not something they find everywhere. This kind of connection can feel subtle, sometimes even frustrating, because it doesn't always come with the reassurance people crave. But it is also more meaningful, because it is rooted in something real. It is not dependent on constant interaction to survive. It exists because of a genuine recognition of who you are. Understanding this difference allows you to stop mistaking intensity for depth. It helps you see that just because someone is giving you less attention doesn't always mean they feel less. And at the same time, it reminds you not to overvalue attention that comes without true understanding. Because in the end, what nourishes a lasting connection is not how often someone reaches for you, but how deeply they recognize you when they do. When you're dealing with someone who is emotionally avoidant, one of the most confusing aspects is how differently they express love. It doesn't come in the obvious forms you've been taught to expect. It's not always consistent, not always verbal, and often not wrapped in the kind of reassurance that makes you feel instantly secure. And because of that, it's easy to assume that what they feel is shallow or uncertain. But in many cases, the truth is not that they feel less. It's that they express it differently, often in indirect but deeply meaningful ways. Avoidant individuals tend to have a complicated relationship with closeness. For them, intimacy can feel overwhelming, not because they don't want it, but because it triggers a sense of losing control or independence. So instead of moving toward connection in a straightforward way, they regulate it. They step in, then step back. They feel deeply, then create space to process those feelings. And in that rhythm, their love becomes less about constant presence and more about intentional moments. One of the ways this shows up is in how they choose to engage with you when they are present. An avoidant person may not talk to you all day, but when they do, there is often a level of focus and sincerity that feels grounded. They're not just filling silence or seeking distraction, they're genuinely tuning into you. Their questions may be thoughtful, they're listening more attentive than expected. It's not about quantity, it's about depth within the moments they can handle. Another indirect expression of love is how they respect your individuality. Someone who is avoidant rarely tries to control or reshape you to fit their needs. In fact, they are often drawn to your independence because it mirrors something they value in themselves. They don't want to consume your time or dominate your space. Instead, they appreciate you as a separate, whole person. While this can sometimes feel like emotional distance, it can also be a form of respect, an acknowledgement that you are not something to be possessed, but someone to be appreciated. You may also notice that they show care through small practical actions rather than emotional declarations. They might remember something important to you and act on it quietly. They may show up in subtle ways during moments that matter, even if they struggle to articulate their feelings. Their love is often embedded in what they do, rather than what they say. And if you're only looking for verbal affirmation or constant closeness, you might miss these quieter signals entirely. Another powerful indicator is how they return. Avoidant individuals often need space to regulate themselves, but when they come back, it's rarely random. It's because something about you stays with them. Even when they try to disconnect, the emotional imprint you've left doesn't easily fade. Their return is not always dramatic or clearly explained, but it carries meaning. It reflects an internal pull they can't easily dismiss, even if they don't fully understand it themselves. There's also a kind of emotional honesty in what they don't do. They don't pretend to be something they're not for long periods of time. If they feel overwhelmed, they withdraw. If they're unsure, they hesitate. While this can be frustrating, it also means that when they do show up, it's more likely to be genuine. They're not performing affection to meet expectations. They're offering what they can authentically access in that moment. Understanding these indirect expressions doesn't mean ignoring your own needs or settling for less than you deserve. It means learning to recognize that love doesn't always follow one script. For some people, especially those who are avoidant, love is something they reveal carefully, in fragments, through behavior rather than words, through presence rather than permanence. And when you learn to see those patterns, you begin to understand that what once looked like indifference may actually be a different language of care, one that requires patience, awareness, and a deeper kind of listening to truly recognize. One of the most difficult realities to grasp in emotionally complex connections is that distance does not always mean detachment. In fact, for someone who leans avoidant, emotional distance can exist at the very same time as a deep internal attachment. This contradiction is what leaves so many people feeling confused, questioning whether the connection is real or simply imagined. But the truth is, these two states, distance and attachment, are not mutually exclusive. They can coexist in a way that feels inconsistent on the outside, yet deeply genuine on the inside. For an avoidant individual, emotional closeness often activates an internal alarm. It's not that they don't want intimacy. It's that intimacy can feel overwhelming, even threatening to their sense of independence or emotional safety. So when they begin to feel something real, something meaningful, their instinct is not always to move closer. Sometimes it's to create space. That space is not necessarily a rejection of you. It's a way for them to regulate what they're feeling. This is where the misunderstanding begins. From the outside, distance looks like disinterest. It looks like someone pulling away, becoming less responsive, less available, less engaged. And naturally, the person on the receiving end interprets this as a lack of care. But internally, something very different may be happening. The avoidant person may be thinking about you more than they admit. They may be replaying conversations, reflecting on moments, feeling the weight of the connection in ways they don't know how to express. Their attachment doesn't disappear just because they step back. In many cases, it becomes more intense precisely because they are trying to contain it. This creates a push-pull dynamic that can feel emotionally exhausting if you don't understand it. They come close and you feel the connection. Then they create distance and you feel the loss of it. But what's important to recognize is that the distance is often not a sign that the connection wasn't real. It's a sign that it was impactful enough to trigger their defenses. There is also a difference in how attachment is experienced versus how it is expressed. Many people associate attachment with visible behaviors, consistent communication, emotional openness, physical presence. But for someone avoidant, attachment is often internalized. It exists in their thoughts, in their emotional memory, in the quiet ways they carry you with them, even when they are not actively engaging with you. They may not reach out every day, but that doesn't mean you are absent from their mind. They may not verbalize their feelings, but that doesn't mean those feelings aren't there. In fact, the very reason they create distance is often because the feelings are strong enough to make them uncomfortable. And here's the deeper layer. When someone is not attached, distance is easy and permanent. There's no internal conflict, no emotional tension, no pull to return. But when attachment exists, distance feels incomplete. It doesn't resolve the connection, it simply pauses it. That's why you often see avoidant individuals come back, not because they've suddenly changed overnight, but because the connection never fully left them. Their behavior may not align with what you expect love to look like, but their internal experience can still be deeply connected to you. And that's where clarity becomes essential. Because recognizing this truth helps you understand that their distance is not always a reflection of your worth. It's often a reflection of their emotional wiring. At the same time, it challenges you to decide what kind of connection you are willing to accept. Because while emotional distance can coexist with attachment, it doesn't always create the kind of relationship that feels safe, stable, and fulfilling in the long run. So the lesson is not just to understand their behavior, it's to see it clearly, to recognize that someone can feel deeply for you and still struggle to show up in a way that meets your needs. And in that awareness, you find your power, not in chasing their closeness, but in choosing whether their version of connection aligns with the life and love you truly deserve. One of the clearest yet most overlooked signs of a deeper connection with someone who is emotionally avoidant is the way they protect your presence in their life, even when they struggle to stay consistently close to you. On the surface, their behavior may feel contradictory. They create distance. They go quiet. They seem unsure. But beneath that, there is often a quiet effort to ensure that you are not completely lost to them. And that effort, subtle as it may be, reveals more than grand gestures ever could. When someone is only interested in your attention, they tend to treat you as replaceable. If things become difficult, if emotions get complicated, or if maintaining the connection requires effort, they drift away without much resistance. There is no deeper sense of responsibility toward the connection, no inner pull to preserve it. But when someone values your presence on a deeper level, even if they don't fully understand how to sustain closeness, they behave differently. They hesitate to sever the bond completely. They leave doors slightly open. They find small ways to maintain a thread between you. This might show up in how they check in after a period of silence. Not with grand explanations, but with a simple message that reestablishes contact. It might appear in the way they respond when you reach out, not always immediately, not always consistently, but with a level of care that suggests you still matter. Even in their distance, there is a boundary they don't cross. They don't deliberately hurt you, they don't try to diminish your value, and they don't erase the connection as if it meant nothing. There's also a kind of restraint in how they handle you emotionally. Someone who doesn't care deeply might play games, provoke jealousy, or manipulate your emotions to maintain control or attention. But an avoidant person who values your presence often avoids those behaviors. Not because they are perfectly emotionally mature, but because on some level, they respect what you represent. They may struggle with closeness, but they don't want to damage the connection beyond repair. You might notice that even when they pull away, they remain mindful of where they leave things. They don't always offer full closure, but they also don't create unnecessary destruction. It's as if they are trying to manage their own need for space while still preserving the possibility of returning to you. That balancing act, imperfect as it is, reveals an underlying intention to keep you in their world. Another sign is how they react to the idea of losing you entirely. While they may tolerate distance, the thought of permanent disconnection often triggers a different response. They may not express it directly, but you can feel a shift. There's a subtle urgency, a change in tone, a willingness to re-engage when they sense that you are truly stepping away. This isn't about control. It's about the realization that your absence would create a void they can't easily ignore. Protecting your presence doesn't always look like consistent effort. In fact, it often looks like inconsistent but meaningful moments of reconnection. And that inconsistency can be confusing if you're only measuring love by stability. But if you look deeper, you'll see that there is a difference between someone who disappears without regard and someone who steps back but never fully lets go. At the same time, this understanding comes with an important truth. Just because someone is protecting your presence doesn't mean they are ready or able to fully honor it. There is a gap between valuing someone and showing up for them in a consistent, reliable way. And recognizing that gap is essential for your own emotional clarity. Because while it can be comforting to see that you matter to someone on a deeper level, it doesn't automatically mean the connection will meet your needs. Their effort to keep you in their life, even in a limited way, reflects something real, but it also highlights the limits of what they can currently give. And that's where your awareness becomes your strength. Gith, you begin to see not just what they feel, but what they can sustain. You recognize the difference between being valued and being fully chosen. And in that space, you are no longer interpreting their behavior blindly. You are seeing it for what it is, an imperfect attempt to hold on to something meaningful, even when they don't yet know how to fully keep it. What often feels like inconsistency in an avoidant person's behavior can actually have a hidden form of consistency beneath it, one that becomes visible only when you stop looking at isolated moments and start observing the pattern as a whole. On the surface, their actions may seem unpredictable. One day they are warm, engaged, and present. The next, they are distant, quiet, or hard to reach. This shift can feel destabilizing, especially if you're trying to make sense of their feelings based on moment-to-moment behavior. But when you step back, you may begin to notice that their inconsistency is not random. It follows a rhythm. That rhythm is often tied to their internal comfort with emotional closeness. When they feel safe, when the connection feels manageable, they lean in. They become more open, more communicative, more expressive. But as soon as the emotional intensity rises beyond what they can comfortably process, they begin to pull back. Not because their feelings have disappeared, but because their system is trying to regulate itself. This push-pull dynamic repeats, creating the illusion of unpredictability, when in reality, it is a predictable response to emotional pressure. In this way, their behavior is consistent in its inconsistency. They are reliably inconsistent, and that reliability is the clue. It tells you that their actions are not driven by whim or manipulation, but by an internal pattern they may not even be fully aware of. Once you recognize this, you stop personalizing every shift. You beg to see that their withdrawal is less about something you did wrong and more about something they are trying to manage within themselves. Another layer of this hidden consistency is how they show up during key moments. Even if they are not present in a steady, day-to-day way, they often appear when something meaningful is at stake. Whether it's a moment of vulnerability, a turning point in the connection, or a time when you truly need support, they may find a way to re-engage. It may not look perfect, and it may not last as long as you'd like, but there is a pattern of presence during moments that matter. That in itself is a form of consistency that is easy to overlook if you're only measuring frequency instead of significance. You might also notice that while their communication fluctuates, the tone of their connection with you remains relatively stable. They don't suddenly become cold or dismissive in a way that contradicts how they felt before. Even when they return after distance, there is a familiarity, a continuity in how they relate to you. It's as if the connection has been paused rather than erased. That continuity suggests that their feelings have not been reset. They have simply been held at a distance until they felt ready to re-engage. There is also consistency in what they don't do. They don't typically replace you easily with someone else in a meaningful way. They may distract themselves, they may create space, but the depth of connection they experienced with you is not something they replicate quickly. This is why they often circle back, not because they are unsure of what they want, but because what they felt with you continues to exist beneath their attempts to create distance. Understanding this hidden consistency shifts your perspective. Instead of being caught in the emotional highs and lows of their behavior, You begin to observe the underlying pattern. You see that their closeness and distance are part of the same cycle, not separate signals of interest and disinterest. And in that awareness, you gain clarity. But this clarity also brings responsibility, because once you recognize the pattern, you can no longer ignore what it means for your own emotional experience. A pattern, no matter how understandable, still has an impact. And while it may reflect something real in them, it also asks you to consider what you are willing to engage with long term. So the hidden consistency in their inconsistency is not just about understanding them, it's about understanding the nature of the connection itself. It reveals that their behavior is not random, but it also highlights that their way of relating may not provide the stability you need. And in seeing both sides clearly, you move from confusion to choice, from reacting to their shifts, to consciously deciding what role their pattern will play in your life. One of the most revealing aspects of an avoidant person's behavior is not just that they leave, but that they return. And more importantly, why they return. On the surface, it can be easy to assume that their reappearance is driven by loneliness, boredom, or a need for validation. And while those motivations can exist, in some cases, they don't fully explain the pattern when the connection has depth. Because when someone keeps coming back to you, despite their tendency to withdraw, it often points to something more meaningful than a simple desire for attention. When a person is driven purely by validation, their focus is on how you make them feel about themselves. They seek reassurance, admiration, or emotional comfort. And once they receive it, the urgency fades. They don't feel a lasting pull toward you as an individual. They feel a temporary pull toward the feeling you provide. That kind of connection is easily redirected. If they find another source of validation, they move on without much internal conflict. But when an avoidant person returns repeatedly, even after creating distance, it suggests that what they experience with you is not easily replaceable. There is something about the connection, your energy, your perspective, the way you interact, that stays with them. It's not just about how you made them feel in the moment. It's about how you impacted them on a deeper level. And that impact doesn't fade simply because they step away. This is why their returns often feel different from casual check-ins. There is a certain familiarity, a sense of continuation, as if the connection picks up where it left off. They may not always articulate it clearly, but their presence carries a kind of recognition. It's not the excitement of something new, it's the pull of something known, something meaningful, that still holds emotional weight. What's important to understand is that returning for an avoidant person is not always easy. Stepping back creates a sense of control and safety for them. It allows them to regulate their emotions and maintain distance from vulnerability. So when they choose to come back, they are in some way stepping back into the very space that challenged them. That choice, even if it's inconsistent or imperfect, reflects an internal conflict between their fear of closeness and their desire for connection. And in that conflict, the connection often wins, at least temporarily. They don't return because it's convenient. In many cases, returning reactivates the very emotions they were trying to manage. It brings them face to face with feelings they don't fully understand or know how to handle. But despite that discomfort, they come back. And that tells you something important. The connection is strong enough to override their instinct to stay distant, even if only for a time. Another layer to this is that when someone returns for validation alone, their engagement tends to be shallow. They seek quick reassurance, surface-level interaction, and then fade again once their need is met. But when someone returns for connection, their presence often carries more depth. They engage in a way that reflects genuine interest in you, not just in what you can give them. They reconnect with the dynamic you shared, not just the attention you provided. You may also notice that their returns are not always perfectly timed or logically explained. They don't always come back when it's most convenient or when it would make the most sense from an external perspective. Instead, they return when something internal shifts, when the emotional distance no longer feels sustainable, when the absence of the connection becomes more uncomfortable than the vulnerability of re-engaging. This is what makes their behavior feel both meaningful and confusing at the same time, because their returns signal that you matter, that the connection has depth, that it left an imprint. But their inability to stay consistently also signals that they are still navigating their own limitations. And this is where clarity becomes essential, because recognizing that someone returns for a genuine connection doesn't automatically mean they are ready to maintain that connection in a stable, fulfilling way. It tells you that what you shared was real, but it doesn't guarantee that they can show up for it in the way you need. So their return is not just a sign of what they feel. It's also a reflection of where they are. It reveals both the strength of the bond and the limits of their current capacity. And understanding both sides allows you to see the situation clearly without over-romanticizing their behavior or dismissing it entirely. There is a powerful distinction, between what someone says and what someone consistently reveals through their actions, especially when it comes to emotionally avoidant individuals. Words can be limited, delayed, or even absent altogether, but patterns of behavior over time, tells a story that is often far more honest. And when you begin to observe those patterns closely, you may start to see that even when their words fall short, their actions quietly communicate a form of respect for your soul. Respect at this level doesn't always look like grand declarations or perfectly expressed emotions. In fact, with someone who struggles to articulate their feelings, it often appears in more subtle, grounded ways. It shows up in how they treat your boundaries. Even if they don't fully understand them at first, they don't consistently try to push past them or manipulate you into abandoning them. There is a line they seem hesitant to cross, because on some level they recognize your value and don't want to diminish it. You may also notice this respect in the way they handle your vulnerability. When you open up, when you share something real, they may not always respond with the exact words you hope to hear, but they don't mock it, dismiss it, or use it against you. There is a care in how they receive those moments, even if they don't fully engage with them. That care reflects an awareness that what you're offering is meaningful, and it deserves to be treated with a certain level of integrity. Another way their actions reveal this respect is in what they avoid doing. They may struggle with closeness, but they don't deliberately try to break your sense of self. They don't consistently belittle you, compete with you, or try to make you feel small in order to feel secure themselves. In fact, many avoidant individuals are drawn to strong, self-aware people. And while that can intimidate them, it also leads to a kind of quiet admiration. They may not always express it openly, but their behavior reflects that they see something in you worth preserving. There's also a noticeable difference in how they interact with you compared to how they might interact in more casual or surface-level connections. With you, there is often more thoughtfulness, more caution, more awareness. They may take longer to respond, but when they do, there is substance. They may not always initiate, but when they engage, there is a sense that they are present in a more genuine way. That difference is not accidental. It reflects the weight they place on the connection. Even in moments of distance, their actions can carry this underlying respect. They don't always disappear in a way that feels careless or dismissive. There is often a sense that they are stepping back rather than shutting you out completely. And when they return, they don't treat you as if nothing mattered. They re-enter with a level of familiarity and regard that acknowledges the connection you share. At the same time, this respect can coexist with limitation. And that's where it becomes important not to confuse respect with readiness. Just because someone respects your soul doesn't mean they know how to fully honor it in a consistent, stable way. They may see your value, they may even care deeply about not hurting you, but they can still fall short in showing up the way a healthy, secure connection requires. This is why observing actions over time becomes so important. Not just isolated moments, not just what they say when they are present, but the overall pattern of how they treat you. Because within that pattern, you can see both the truth of their feelings and the reality of their capacity. And when you see both clearly, something shifts within you. You stop trying to extract meaning from every word, every silence, every mixed signal. Instead, you begin to trust what is consistently being shown to you. You recognize the respect that exists without inflating it into something it's not. And in doing so, you ground yourself in reality rather than hope. Because in the end, the most powerful form of understanding is not just seeing that someone values you, it's recognizing whether that value is being expressed in a way that truly aligns with the kind of love and consistency you deserve. Thank you for your time and presence. May you always choose the love that truly chooses you. Goodbye for now, and remember, your worth is never something you have to prove, only something you have to honor.